The divorce papers felt heavier than they should have in my trembling hands. How does a marriage shatter in a single night? How does 8 years of shared dreams, whispered promises, and quiet Sunday mornings dissolve into cold, legal documents delivered by a stranger at my door? My name is Evadne Strickland, and I thought I was the victim in this story. I was wrong. 3 months earlier, everything seemed perfect on the surface. Simon and I lived in our suburban 2-story home with our 8-year-old daughter Lila, maintaining the facade of a happy family. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, I felt invisible, neglected, suffocating in the mundane routine of our marriage. Simon worked as an accountant at Henderson and Associates, spending long hours hunched over spreadsheets and tax returns. At 36, he had grown comfortable in his introversion, content with quiet evenings at home while I craved excitement, validation, something more than the endless cycle of work, dinner, bedtime stories, and sleep. That Friday evening in September, I stood before my bedroom mirror, applying lipstick with careful precision. The downtown event venue was hosting a networking party for HR professionals, and I had spent weeks looking forward to it. As an HR coordinator at Meridian Solutions, these events were my lifeline to the outside world, my escape from the suffocating domesticity that had become my prison. "You look beautiful," Simon said from the doorway, his voice gentle but distant. "Are you sure you don't want me to come in with you?" I turned, suppressing the irritation that flared in my chest. "Simon, we've discussed this. It's a professional event. I need to network, make connections. Having my husband hovering around won't help my career." His face fell slightly, and I felt a familiar pang of guilt mixed with resentment. Why couldn't he understand that I needed space to breathe, to be seen as more than just a wife and mother? "I could wait in the car," he offered quietly, "just in case you need a ride home." "Fine," I said, checking my reflection one last time. The black cocktail dress hugged my curves perfectly, and I felt powerful, desirable for the first time in months. "But don't expect me to check in every hour. I'm a grown woman, Simon." The drive downtown was tense, filled with uncomfortable silence. Simon gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his jaw set in that way that meant he was holding back words. I stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past, feeling like a caged bird finally approaching freedom. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Miriam Branson. "Don't let Simon hold you back tonight, sweetheart. You deserve to have fun." Mum had never really approved of Simon, considering him too passive, too boring for her ambitious daughter. She frequently reminded me that I had settled, that I deserved better than a quiet accountant who preferred books to parties. "Everything okay?" Simon asked, glancing at my phone. "Just Mom wishing me luck," I lied smoothly. When we arrived at the venue, Simon parked across the street, engine running. "I'll be right here when you're ready to go home." Something in his tone irritated me beyond reason. "You're making this sound like I'm a teenager going to prom. I can take care of myself." "I know you can," he said softly. "I just want to make sure you're safe." I leaned over and kissed his cheek perfunctorily. "I'll text you when I'm ready." The party was everything I had hoped for and more. The venue buzzed with energy, successful professionals mingling over craft cocktails and sophisticated conversation. I felt alive for the first time in months, engaging in discussions about workplace dynamics, industry trends, anything more stimulating than Lila's homework or Simon's quiet observations about his day. That's when I met Callum Mercer. He was 31, charming in that effortless way that some men possess, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. He worked in corporate consulting, traveling frequently, living the kind of exciting life I envied. "You seem too interesting to be stuck in HR," he said, appearing beside me at the bar with a confident smile. I laughed, feeling a flutter of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. "And you seem too charming to be in consulting." We talked for hours, his attention like a drug I hadn't realized I was craving. He listened when I spoke, really listened, asking thoughtful questions about my goals, my dreams, the parts of myself I had forgotten existed. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Simon, but I ignored them, lost in the intoxicating feeling of being truly seen by someone who found me fascinating. "This place is getting crowded," Callum said around 10 o'clock, his hand lightly touching my arm. "I know a quieter spot where we could continue our conversation." I should have said no. I should have remembered Simon waiting in the car, Lila sleeping safely at home, the vows I had made 8 years ago. Instead, I felt a rush of rebellious excitement. "Lead the way," I heard myself saying. We slipped out through a side door, Callum's hand warm on the small of my back. I didn't look toward the street where Simon waited, didn't think about the consequences of my choice. For the first time in years, I was acting purely on impulse, chasing the thrill of being desired. What I didn't know was that Simon's accountant mind had already begun collecting data, documenting evidence with the same methodical precision he applied to tax returns. His dash camera had recorded our exit, time-stamped and crystal clear. The hotel lobby was elegant, all marble floors and soft lighting that made everything feel dreamlike and unreal. Callum moved with practiced confidence, his hand never leaving my back as he guided me toward the elevator. "I have a room here," he said casually, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "We can talk without all that noise." My phone buzzed again in my purse, but I ignored it. Simon's worried text felt like chains trying to drag me back to a life that suddenly seemed impossibly small and suffocating. In the elevator, Callum stood close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive and intoxicating. "You're married," he observed, noticing my wedding ring. "Technically," I said, surprising myself with my honesty, "but I feel invisible most of the time, like I'm just going through the motions of someone else's life." He nodded with understanding that felt genuine. "I've never been married. Too much freedom to give up. But I can see how someone like you would feel trapped." The room was on the 15th floor, overlooking the city lights. Callum poured wine from a bottle he had somehow procured, and we sat on the small sofa by the window, our conversation flowing like water. "Tell me about your husband," he said, not out of guilt or concern, but with the curiosity of someone studying an interesting specimen. "Simon's a good man," I said, the wine loosening my tongue. "But he's so predictable, safe. He thinks excitement is trying a new restaurant or buying a different brand of coffee. I feel like I'm slowly disappearing into his quiet little world." My phone rang then, Simon's name flashing on the screen. I declined the call without hesitation. "He's probably worried," Callum observed, but his tone suggested he found Simon's concern more amusing than admirable. "He's always worried. Worried I'll be late, worried I'll have too much fun, worried I'll remember there's a whole world outside our suburban bubble." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. We talked until nearly 2 in the morning, the conversation gradually becoming more intimate, more dangerous. Callum was everything Simon wasn't: spontaneous, adventurous, willing to take risks. When he kissed me, I didn't pull away. I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache and a crushing sense of dread. Callum was already dressed, checking his phone with the casual air of someone for whom this was routine. "I have a flight to catch," he said when he noticed I was awake. "Last night was fun, Evadne. Take care of yourself." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the magnitude of what I had done. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Simon and dozens of texts, progressing from concern to panic to hurt confusion. The last one, sent at 3 a.m., simply said, "Please just let me know you're alive." I called a taxi, my hands shaking as I tried to construct a story that would explain my absence. My phone had died, I would say. I had lost track of time talking to colleagues, fallen asleep in Holly Chen's car. Simon would believe me because he trusted me, because in 8 years of marriage, I had never given him reason not to. The house was quiet when I arrived home at 7 in the morning. Simon sat at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, his face grey with exhaustion and worry. "Where were you?" he asked simply, his voice hoarse. "My phone died," I said, not meeting his eyes. "Holly and I got to talking, and I lost track of time. I fell asleep at her place rather than wake you up for a ride." He studied my face for a long moment. "I called Holly at midnight. She said you had left the party hours earlier." My heart pounded, but I forced myself to look offended. She must have been confused. You know how these events are. People coming and going all night. "I waited for you until 3, Simon said quietly. I was terrified something had happened. "I'm sorry," I said, and part of me meant it. I should have found a way to call, but Simon, you can't keep hovering over me like this. I'm not a child. His expression shifted, hurt replacing worry. I wasn't hovering. I was concerned about my wife who disappeared without a word. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice rising. "You're making me feel guilty for having a life outside this house. I need space to breathe, Simon. I need to feel like a person, not just your wife and Lila's mother." Upstairs, I heard Lila's bedroom door open, her small footsteps on the hardwood floor. "Mommy?" she called, appearing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas. "Why didn't you come home last night? I had a bad dream." The guilt hit me like a physical blow, but I pushed it down, focusing instead on my resentment toward Simon for making me feel like the villain in this scenario. "Mummy had to work late, sweetheart," I said, kneeling to hug her, "but I'm here now." Over Lila's head, I met Simon's eyes. He was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. Not just hurt, but something calculating, analytical. For the first time, I wondered what he was thinking behind that quiet, methodical accountant's mind. What I didn't know was that Simon had already downloaded the call logs from our phone plan, had reviewed the timestamps of my ignored calls and messages. He had watched me leave the party with another man on his dash camera, had spent the sleepless night not just worrying, but beginning to document the unraveling of our marriage with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to his professional work. The evidence was already mounting, and I was too intoxicated by my newfound sense of freedom to notice the trap closing around me. The following week settled into an uneasy routine. Simon went to work, came home, helped Lila with homework, and made dinner, all while treating me with a politeness that felt more chilling than anger would have been. I threw myself into my social life with renewed vigor, meeting Holly and other colleagues for drinks, attending every networking event I could find, desperately trying to recapture that feeling of excitement I had experienced with Callum. But Callum had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. His consulting firm confirmed he was traveling internationally, unavailable for contact. The realization that I had risked everything for someone who saw me as nothing more than a pleasant evening's entertainment should have been humbling. Instead, it only fueled my resentment toward Simon and the life I felt trapped in. "You seem different," Holly observed over cocktails at our usual Friday spot. "More confident. It suits you." Holly had always been my enabler, the friend who encouraged my complaints about Simon's boring predictability and urged me to put myself first for once. At 33, she was successfully single, climbing the corporate ladder without the burden of a family to hold her back. "I'm finally remembering who I am outside of being a wife and mother," I said, taking a larger sip of wine than necessary. "Simon's been so paranoid since that networking party. He actually asked me to show him my phone the other day." "That's controlling behavior," Holly said immediately. "You need to set boundaries." I nodded, feeling validated. "He's been different, distant but watching me constantly. It's like living with a security camera." What I didn't mention was that Simon had good reason to be suspicious. I had been more careless with my lies, staying out later, being vague about my whereabouts. Part of me wanted to be caught, wanted the confrontation that would force some kind of change in our stagnant marriage. The breaking point came at a family brunch 2 weeks later. Simon's mother, Janet, had invited us to her country club, one of those stuffy establishments where appearances mattered more than authenticity. I had never fit in with Simon's family. They were too reserved, too judgmental of anyone who didn't share their quiet, conservative values. "Evadne's been quite the social butterfly lately," Janet observed with that tight smile she reserved for comments that sounded complimentary but weren't. "Simon tells me you're out several nights a week now." "I'm networking," I said, cutting my eggs Benedict with more force than necessary. "Building my career. Some of us can't be content with the status quo forever." Simon's brother Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. At 40, he was more outgoing than Simon, but shared the family's tendency toward loyalty and traditional values. "That's wonderful that you're advancing professionally," Tom's wife Lisa said diplomatically. "It must be hard to balance everything." "It would be easier if I had a husband who supported my ambitions instead of questioning my every move," I said, immediately regretting the words but unable to stop myself. The table fell silent. Simon's face flushed red, but he said nothing, just continued cutting his food with mechanical precision. "Simon's always been supportive of your career," Janet said coldly. "He's the one who encouraged you to take that HR position in the first place." "Supporting my career and supporting my growth as a person are two different things," I replied. "Simon wants me to stay exactly the same as the day we met. Grateful, dependent, content with his version of happiness." "Maybe we should talk about this at home," Simon said quietly, his voice strained. "Why?" "Because it's embarrassing to admit that our marriage isn't perfect, that I have needs and desires beyond making your dinner and raising your child." The words hung in the air like poison. Lila, who had been coloring quietly beside me, looked up with wide, confused eyes. "Is Daddy not my daddy too?" she asked in a small voice. The question shattered something inside me, but instead of apologizing, I doubled down. "Of course he is, sweetheart. Mummy's just frustrated because grown-ups sometimes disagree about things." "Disagreeing is one thing," Janet said, her voice ice-cold. "Public humiliation is another." After brunch, the car ride home was suffocating. Simon drove in complete silence while Lila dozed in her car seat. When we arrived home, he disappeared into his home office and closed the door. I found him there an hour later, hunched over his computer with the same focused intensity he brought to complex tax returns. "What are you working on?" I asked, trying to peer over his shoulder. He minimized the screen quickly. "Just some research." "Research for what?" He turned to face me, and I was struck again by that calculating expression I had been seeing more frequently. "Research for understanding," he said simply. "I'm trying to figure out when my wife became someone I don't recognize." "Maybe your wife was always someone you never bothered to really see," I shot back. He nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he already suspected. "Maybe you're right." That night, I called Holly to vent about the disastrous brunch, painting myself as the victim of Simon's family's judgment and his passive-aggressive behavior. "You need to document this," Holly advised. "If things get worse, you'll want evidence of his controlling behavior." It was ironic advice, considering that Simon was already 3 weeks into his own documentation process. While I complained to friends about his suspicions, he was quietly gathering proof of my deceptions with the methodical patience that made him excellent at his job. The hotel keycard logs from that night with Callum, the location data from my phone that contradicted my story about staying with Holly, screenshots of social media posts that placed me at venues I had claimed never to visit. I thought I was building a case for my own victimhood, but Simon was building something far more comprehensive and legally actionable. October brought a chill that seemed to seep into every corner of our house. Simon and I moved around each other like polite strangers, maintaining the facade of normalcy for Lila's sake, while our marriage slowly decomposed beneath the surface. My relationship with Holly and my other work friends had become my lifeline, the only place where I felt validated and understood. We met regularly for drinks, dissecting my marital problems, with the enthusiasm of amateur therapists. "He's trying to isolate you," Holly declared during one of our sessions at the trendy wine bar downtown. "Classic controlling behavior. He wants you dependent and grateful." "Exactly," I agreed, feeling the familiar rush of righteous indignation. "He acts like he's this patient, long-suffering husband, but really he's manipulating me into feeling guilty for wanting more from life." What I didn't realize was that our conversations had become repetitive, focused entirely on my grievances. My friends were growing tired of my constant complaints, though they were too polite to say so directly. At home, Simon had become even more withdrawn, spending long hours in his office with the door closed. When I asked what he was working on, he gave vague answers about client research and case studies. His laptop was password protected now, something that had never been necessary before. "Why the secrecy?" I demanded one evening, finding him hunched over spreadsheets that he quickly minimized when I entered. "It's confidential client information," he said without looking up. "You know I can't discuss that." "Since when do you work on client files at home?" "Since I've had trouble concentrating at the office." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Too many distractions." The implication stung, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Lila had begun acting out at school, her teacher reporting that she seemed anxious and distracted. When I was called in for a conference, I felt the familiar surge of resentment toward Simon for creating an atmosphere of tension that was affecting our daughter. "Children are very sensitive to conflict in the home," the teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, explained gently. "Lila has been drawing some concerning pictures during art time." She showed me Lila's recent artwork, family portraits where the parents stood on opposite sides of the page, a house with storm clouds overhead, a little girl alone in what appeared to be a courtroom. "I don't understand," I said, though my stomach was churning. "We don't fight in front of her." "Children pick up on emotional undercurrents," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "They sense when their parents are unhappy, even when adults think they're hiding it well." That night, I confronted Simon about the impact our issues were having on Lila. "She's drawing pictures of divorce courts," I said, throwing the artwork on his desk. "This is what your passive-aggressive behavior is doing to our daughter." Simon studied the drawings with an expression I couldn't read. "These are very detailed for an 8-year-old. "That's your response? Art criticism?" "I'm wondering where she learned about courtrooms and legal proceedings," he said quietly. "We don't watch legal dramas. She doesn't have access to that kind of content." The question hung in the air, unanswered and somehow ominous. My mother called that weekend, full of advice and righteous anger on my behalf. "Simon's always been too weak for you," she declared. "A real man would either fight for his marriage or end it cleanly. This passive-aggressive nonsense is just cruel." "I think he's trying to make me feel crazy," I confided, "like I'm imagining problems that don't exist." "Gaslighting," Mum said immediately. "Your father did the same thing before I divorced him. They make you question your own perceptions until you don't trust yourself anymore." The conversation reinforced my growing conviction that I was the wronged party in this scenario, that Simon's quiet documentation and watchful behavior were forms of psychological manipulation designed to keep me trapped and compliant. I began staying out even later, accepting invitations to events I would have previously declined, anything to avoid the suffocating atmosphere at home. Each time I walked through the front door to find Simon reading quietly in the living room, his calm, "How was your evening?" felt like an accusation. "Fine," I would answer curtly, heading straight upstairs to avoid further conversation. But Simon's questions were becoming more specific, more pointed. "Holly mentioned she didn't see you at the HR mixer on Thursday," he said casually one morning over coffee. My blood ran cold. When had he talked to Holly? "She must have missed me," I said quickly. "It was crowded." "She said she was there the whole time, specifically looking for you because you had made plans to go together." The trap was closing, but I was too proud and too committed to my narrative to acknowledge it. "Holly's been drinking more lately," I said, hating myself even as the words left my mouth. Her memory isn't always reliable. Simon nodded slowly, that calculating expression more pronounced than ever. "I'm sure you're right," he said, but his tone suggested the opposite. "That afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. Package delivered to your husband's office. T." The message made no sense, but something about it filled me with dread. When Simon came home that evening, he was carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression I had never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, but resolved. "We need to talk," he said simply. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my carefully constructed version of reality was about to collapse. Simon set the manila envelope on the kitchen table between us, like a piece of evidence in a trial. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows that made our familiar kitchen feel like foreign territory. "Lila's at my mother's for the night," he said quietly. "I thought we should have this conversation without her overhearing." My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to appear calm, even defiant. "What conversation? And what's in the envelope?" "The conversation about our marriage," Simon said, his voice steady and controlled. "About honesty, about what really happened the night of your networking party." "I've told you what happened. My phone died. I lost track of time." "You left the party with another man at 10:47 p.m., Simon interrupted, his words precise and devastating. "His name is Callum Mercer. You spent the night with him at the Marriott downtown. You returned home at 7:15 a.m. wearing the same clothes from the night before." The bottom dropped out of my world, but years of deflection and manipulation kicked in automatically. "How dare you spy on me?" I said, my voice rising. "How dare you violate my privacy like some kind of stalker? This is exactly the controlling behavior I've been talking about." Simon opened the envelope and spread its contents across the table. Photographs from his dash camera showing me leaving the party with Callum, hotel keycard logs, phone records, screenshots of text messages I thought had been deleted. "I wasn't spying," he said calmly. "I was protecting myself, and our daughter." I stared at the evidence, my mind racing for explanations, justifications, anything to maintain my position as the wronged party in this scenario. "You've been planning this," I accused, "building some kind of case against me like I'm a criminal. What kind of husband does that?" "The kind whose wife has been lying to him for months," Simon replied. "The kind who needs to understand the truth before making decisions about his family's future." "Nothing happened," I said desperately. "Callum and I just talked. I was confused, feeling neglected, but nothing physical happened." Simon pulled out another photograph. Security footage from the hotel lobby showing Callum's hand on my back as we entered the elevator together, my body language clearly indicating intimacy and intention. "Stop lying to me, Evadne," he said, and for the first time, his voice cracked slightly. "Please, we're past that now." The plea in his tone should have broken through my defenses, should have prompted honesty and remorse. Instead, it triggered a panic that made me double down on my deceptions. "Fine," I said, standing abruptly. Maybe I did spend time with him. Maybe I needed to feel desired and appreciated for once in my life. Maybe I needed to remember what it felt like to be seen as more than just a housewife and mother. "So you're admitting to the affair?" "I'm admitting to being human," I shot back, "to having needs that you've ignored for years. You want to paint me as the villain. But what about your role in this? What about the way you've taken me for granted, assumed I'd be satisfied with your scraps of attention and affection?" Simon gathered the photographs back into a neat stack, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I've made mistakes," he said quietly. "I know I'm not the most exciting husband. I know I can be too focused on work, too comfortable with routine. But I never betrayed our vows. I never lied to you about where I was or who I was with." "Because you never go anywhere or see anyone," I said cruelly. "It's easy to be faithful when you have no opportunities to be otherwise." The words hit their mark. Simon flinched as if I had slapped him, and for a moment, I saw the hurt, lonely man beneath the careful composure. "You're right," he said finally. "I am boring. I am predictable. I prefer quiet evenings at home to parties and networking events. But I thought that's what we built together. A peaceful life. A stable home for our daughter." "Well, maybe I want more than peace and stability," I said. "Maybe I want passion and excitement and the feeling that I'm alive." "Then you should have talked to me," Simon said. "You should have told me you were unhappy instead of lying and cheating and making me feel crazy for suspecting the truth. Would it have mattered? Would you have suddenly become someone different?" Simon was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "No," he said finally. "I probably wouldn't have changed much, but I would have let you go with dignity, instead of discovering that my wife thinks so little of me that she'd rather lie than have an honest conversation about our problems." The simple statement hit harder than any accusation or angry outburst could have. I realized that Simon wasn't trying to trap me or control me. He was trying to understand how we had reached this point, how the woman he had loved and trusted had become someone capable of such casual cruelty. "Simon," I started, but he held up his hand. "I need some time to think," he said, gathering the envelope and its damning contents. "I'll be staying at Tom's for a few days. Lila can stay with my mother until we figure out what comes next." "You can't take her away from me," I said, panic rising in my throat. "I'm not taking her anywhere," Simon said sadly. "I'm protecting her from whatever this is going to become." He paused at the kitchen doorway, looking back at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "I loved you, Evadne. I still love you, but I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't think you do either." After he left, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the debris of our marriage, and for the first time began to understand that my actions had consequences I had never considered. But even then, even facing the wreckage I had created, I couldn't fully accept responsibility. Instead, I called my mother, seeking comfort and validation for my position as the misunderstood victim in this tragic story. I had no idea that Simon's next move would remove that option forever. The process server arrived on a Tuesday morning, while I was still in my bathrobe, hair uncombed, nursing my third cup of coffee, and a growing sense of dread that had become my constant companion over the past week. "Evadne Strickland?" the woman asked, her voice professionally neutral. "Yes," I said, though something in her tone made me want to deny it. "You're being served with legal documents regarding dissolution of marriage and temporary custody arrangements." The thick envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Through the front window, I could see Simon sitting in his car across the street, watching. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in his expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but a calm resolution that terrified me more than any emotional outburst could have. Inside the envelope were documents that laid out my life in cold, legal terms. Petition for dissolution of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences and adultery. Temporary custody arrangement, granting Simon primary physical custody of Lila pending further hearings. Restraining order, preventing me from accessing joint financial accounts without court approval. But it was the attached evidence file that truly destroyed me. Simon had documented everything with the methodical precision that made him excellent at his job. Phone records showing my lies about staying with Holly. Credit card statements revealing charges at restaurants and bars I had claimed never to visit. Hotel security footage, dash camera recordings, screenshots of social media posts that contradicted my carefully constructed stories. Most devastating of all was a sworn statement from Tom, Simon's brother, who worked in hotel security and had provided the lobby footage that showed me entering the elevator with Callum, my body language making our intentions unmistakably clear. My hands shook as I read through page after page of evidence, seeing my deceptions laid out in stark, undeniable detail. Every lie I had told, every manipulation I had attempted, every moment of gaslighting I had inflicted on Simon. It was all there, documented and time-stamped, with the precision of a forensic accountant. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Holly, her face pale and uncomfortable. "I got a call from a lawyer," she said without preamble. "They wanted to verify some information about your whereabouts on certain dates." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," Holly said, and I could hear the judgment in her voice. "Evadne, I can't lie under oath. I won't risk my career or my integrity to cover for your affair." "So you're abandoning me too," I said bitterly. "I'm not abandoning you, but I'm also not going to pretend that what you did was okay." Holly's voice was firm. "I encouraged you to stand up for yourself, to demand better treatment. I never told you to cheat on your husband and lie about it." After she left, I called my mother, desperate for someone to take my side, to validate my position as the victim in this scenario. "This is what happens when you marry weak men," Mom said immediately. "Simon's trying to punish you for having needs he couldn't meet." But even as she spoke the words I wanted to hear, they felt hollow. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. I had cheated, I had lied, I had manipulated and gaslighted my husband while painting myself as the wronged party. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. I hired a lawyer, but even she seemed skeptical of my chances. "The evidence against you is quite comprehensive," she said, reviewing Simon's documentation. "Your husband has been very thorough. We can argue for joint custody, but given the adultery and the pattern of deception, it's going to be an uphill battle." "What about my rights as a mother?" I demanded. "You still have rights," she assured me. "But the court's primary concern is the child's best interests. Your husband has documented evidence that your behavior has been affecting your daughter's emotional well-being." She showed me Lila's drawings from school, the sad family portraits, the storm clouds, the courtroom scenes that had seemed so mysterious when I first saw them. "Your daughter has been aware of the conflict in your home," the lawyer explained. "Children often know more than we think they do." The hearing itself was a nightmare of clinical precision. Simon's lawyer presented evidence like pieces in a puzzle, each document and photograph building an undeniable picture of my deceptions and their impact on our family. I watched Simon testify with calm, factual precision about discovering my affair, about the months of lies and gaslighting that followed, about his concerns for Lila's emotional well-being in an unstable environment. "I don't want to punish my wife," he said, when asked about his custody request. "I want to protect my daughter from the chaos that our marriage has become. I want to provide her with stability while her mother figures out what she really wants from life." When it was my turn to testify, I tried to explain my side, the neglect I had felt, the need for validation, the way Simon's controlling behavior had driven me to seek connection elsewhere. But every word sounded hollow against the weight of documented evidence. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Primary custody to Simon, supervised visitation for me pending completion of counseling programs, financial arrangements that left me with minimal access to our joint assets. As I walked out of the courthouse, I saw Simon standing by his car, holding Lila's hand. Our daughter looked up at me with confusion and sadness that broke what was left of my heart. "Mommy?" she said in a small voice. "Are you coming home with us?" "Not today, sweetheart," I managed to say. "But I'll see you soon." Simon met my eyes over Lila's head. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction at his victory, just sadness and the exhaustion of a man who had fought a battle he never wanted to fight. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Evadne," he said quietly. "I really do." As they drove away, I stood alone on the courthouse steps, holding the divorce papers that had started this whole nightmare. The woman who had vanished with a stranger after the party while her husband waited outside was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the true cost of her choices. The receipts had been presented, the reckoning completed. Simon had won not through manipulation or cruelty, but through the simple power of documented truth. I had thought I was the victim in this story. I was wrong.